Hello, I'm Stephen Fagan, curator of the Sixth Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. Our institution's ongoing oral history project explores the history and culture of the 1960s, as well as the life, death, and legacy of President John F. Kennedy. This year, to celebrate Martin Luther King Day and Black History Month, we are pleased to present Voices from the Civil Rights Movement, a special series of recent oral history interviews with 1960s activists. In these intimate, detailed, one-on-one conversations, an outstanding group of storytellers share powerful memories from several key moments of the movement, including the Montgomery bus boycott, Freedom Rides, the March on Washington, Mississippi Freedom Summer, the Selma to Montgomery March, and the SCOPE project of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. We hope that these remarkable, relevant stories will spark conversation and build bridges of understanding and communication between generations. Please keep in mind that these are full, free-flowing oral history interviews. In addition to moments of technical difficulties, there may be harsh language and graphic descriptions of violence. Viewer discretion is advised. If you or someone you know would like to share memories of the 1960s or articulate how President Kennedy has impacted your life, please contact us at oralhistory@jfk.org. We continue to record conversations year-round as part of this ongoing archival initiative, and we believe that everyone has a story. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you enjoy these voices from the Civil Rights Movement.
And ma'am, at the beginning, we always invite our guests, if they would, to introduce themselves with their full name, date and place of birth, and just a little background about their early life.
Hello, my name is Lynda Blackmon Lowery. I am a child of the 50s and 60s, born March 22nd, 1950, oldest of two living siblings. I'm sorry. I was born and raised in Selma, Alabama. And in the 50s, 60s, Selma, Alabama was one of those Jim Crow states, still is one of those Jim Crow cities. The state is still a Jim Crow state, but the city has changed a lot, and it started changing in 1963. That's when Dr. King came to Selma to discuss with our parents the benefits of voting and how to get it nonviolently. My story actually starts on September the 19th, 1957. That's the day my mother passed. And I heard my grandmother and the older people saying she wouldn't have died if she hadn't been colored. Now, being raised in a segregated society, I knew that in Selma, Alabama, white people didn't like Black people, and Black people weren't crazy about white people either. But I discovered at the age of 7 that white people in Selma, Alabama hated Black people, so they would let our mother die, our father's wife die, our grandmother's only child die. And when I was 7 years old, I made a vow that when I grow up, when I get big, I'm gonna change things. And nobody would ever have to grow up without a mommy again because of the color of her skin. That vow led me to hearing Dr. King speak at the age of 13. And he was talking to our parents about getting the right to vote and getting it non-violently. In that speech, he said 3 words that I have lived by since the age of 13. He said, you can get anybody to do anything with steady, loving confrontation. And as a 13-year-old, when I first heard it, it went straight past my ears. But when he said it the second time in that speech, my spirit heard him say, Lynda, you can get anybody to do anything with steady, loving confrontation. And I remember jumping up in church. He was at Tabernacle Baptist Church. I remember jumping up saying, oh yeah, that's how I'm gonna do it. Because I remembered my vow. And my grandmother pulling me back down on the pew saying, shut up, child, you're in church. But I looked around me and there were so many people standing up saying, we're standing for change, that I knew I would not be by myself. That vow at the age of 7 also had me going to jail 9 times before my 15th birthday, being the longest time being at 2 separate state prison camps, one Camp Selma and the other one Camp Thomaston in Thomaston, Alabama. That led me to march on March 22nd, on March 7th, rather, at the age of 14, across a bridge where I, along with others, was brutally beaten. At the age of 14, I received 35 stitches in my head. That led me to march one day later on Turnaround Tuesday with Dr. King and thousands of concerned citizens and clergy that had come to Selma by his request to show that they stood with us and to show that they was against the brutality we received on that Sunday. That led me to be the youngest child whose name is on the list of 300 that was allowed to walk from Selma to Montgomery. And I made the entire 54-mile walk, turning 15 on the second day of that march.
Yours is an extraordinary and a very beautiful story, and one that you, of course, have put into a book for young readers, which I had the great pleasure, the joy of sharing with my 9-year-old over the weekend. We read it together out loud in one sitting, and I think we were both in tears by the end when you stand in front of the state capitol and yell out to Governor Wallace.
I'm here.
What an extraordinary story, and thank you so much for putting it in such a readable form with your co-authors for young readers to learn about the sacrifices and the struggle that you went through in the 60s. It was just an amazing experience to get to share that with her over the weekend. Several things stood out to me that I'd like to, maybe touch on if we could. You were so eager to get started, and yet at the very beginning, you were considered too young to participate in the sit-ins, but I'm fascinated by the way you were involved by essentially being kind of an errand person, helping to notify parents when kids would get in trouble. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that early form of activism you were involved in.
Well, I have a best friend named Betty Mae Fights. And Betty is a couple or so years older than I, but Betty had also lost her mother at a very young age. And we kind of like clinged together, supported each other. But Betty has this voice. To this day, she still sings so beautifully. And I thought if I followed Betty, I would learn how to sing like her. And Betty and the older kids was being trained in the Principles of Nonviolence by now Dr. Bernard Lafayette. And I would sneak out of school too and hang at Ward Chapel Church and at the local churches where he was doing the training. I was kind of small for my size and height, for my age rather, in height. So they wouldn't let me go and sit in at the lunch counters or try to integrate the all-white downstairs of the movie theaters or the Dairy Queen and stuff like that. And when they were making plans, they would always send me to the store, to the local hamburger place to get something. So my nickname became Gopher because they always had me going for something. And it came in handy when they would be arrested, all of them. And I needed to tell somebody's mother. So that's what I would do. Run and get Miss Bernice Bonner or whoever at the time, Ms. Robinson, whoever I could at the closest point of where they were being arrested. I go for the mama. They never would let me march, and I was just so disappointed. And they said I was too young, but I wasn't too young. I was 13, and I had a voice. I had something to say, and I wanted to be a part of what they were saying and let somebody hear what I had to say. And that's what made telling my story and to Elspeth Leacock and Susan Buckley and getting the book published, that made it all the more important to me because I feel that young people have a voice. And if they don't use that voice, they're going to lose that voice. And even though I was participating and there learning, I still could not use my voice. And I thought I had something to say, you know. So that's why it's important now. That's why I feel that even though turning 15 on the road to freedom, my story of the 1965 voting rights marches in Selma, Alabama is still important for young people and old people alike. It is to inspire and give young people a voice. I often quote Common from the song Glory in the movie Selma. And in that song, he says, you need the wisdom of the elders and the energy of the young. I firmly agree, but I say you need the wisdom of the elders and the energy and knowledge of the young, because I think young people have the knowledge in them to change this country for the better, for everyone. See, I tell people often that in the 60s, our voices was heard because we were putting the word unity back in the word community. And it was a dangerous job that we were doing. But the danger is minimal compared to the danger that our young people and people face today. See, in the 60s, we knew who our enemy was. We knew who was under those sheets. You know, we knew it wasn't anybody under there looked like me. So we got along with what we were doing, and I'm talking about collectively among ourselves. Today, the job is much more dangerous because you don't know who your enemy is. You don't know if you go to church or to school or shopping or out for fun or just driving down the street, you don't know who that enemy is. And it's more dangerous now. And the job that our young people have, the job that we all have today, is to put the word human back in the word humanity. Once people began to see, practice, feel their humanity, I think the world would change, and it would change for the better.
The brutality against children that's documented in the book is just eye-opening. The use of cattle prods, and as you mentioned, sending you to those harsh prison camps. And yet it was so crucial for children to be involved. Maybe you could talk a little bit about why Dr. King was so adamant that children be involved in those early marches.
At first, it was Dr. Bernard Lafayette was training older, and when I say older, I mean 18, 19-year-olds, 17-year-olds, and they just started letting all of the children come in on January the 3rd, 1965. See, on the 2nd of January, 1965, Dr. King came and spoke, and he said that we would start marching and going to jail by the thousands on tomorrow, January 3rd. But in between 1963 and that day, January 2nd, 1965, we children had organized ourselves. We knew we had a job to do. See, if our parents marched, they would go to jail. They go to jail, they'll lose their jobs. They have no jobs. That would tear the family unit apart. We knew that. That would separate the family. Much like at the borders still today, children separated from their parents. But we knew this, and we could not let this happen. And to see that there were so many of us that recognized the fact that we had a voice and this was how to use our voice, we willingly participated in the demonstrations. We willingly went to jail, and we would go to jail. We did this from January 3rd to March 7th, 1965. We were constant. We were committed.
And it didn't seem to matter to the white law enforcement that you were young. I mean, they would still brutalize you the same way they would treat adults.
Oh, they had no they had no calm about them. They were there. They was gonna do what they were going to do. It took me 40 years before I could even talk about this. And I didn't know, even working in mental health for really over 37 years, I did not know that I had post-traumatic stress syndrome. I did not recognize that in me. But once my sister, who is younger than I am, encouraged me to start talking about my story, all I could do was tell you a little bit and cry and cry. And then I could tell you a little bit more and I'd cry some more. But once I started talking about it, I started getting this burden lifted out of my stomach, because everything in there that was still in there about that time, growing up in a segregated South, was in knots in my stomach. And I started to be able, after a period of time, to smile. And then I realized that I didn't hate anybody from that time. I didn't hate anybody for doing what they did, because if they had not done what they did, there wouldn't be any change today. So I kind of give them kudos. I clap sometime for the brutality of the white person, and that I'm able to live and talk about it.
If I could back up just a little bit, during this time, of course, John F. Kennedy was president from 61 to 63. Can you share with me your thoughts as a teenager on President Kennedy?
Oh, President Kennedy was the finest white man ever walked this earth, as far as I was concerned. When I was 12 and 13, that man was gorgeous. And my grandmother and my dad and my parents, they thought of him as somebody who was going to make things better, not only for white people, but for Black people too. And they could not vote for him. But I remember having the King Kennedy plates, displayed. My grandmother loved herself some John Kennedy, and she thought that his wife was the prettiest white woman on this earth. Like, we had to look at him and hear her gush over him. As far as the politics, still at age 13, I didn't recognize the importance of politics. It didn't hit me like that. Being involved in a movement was something I think we were ordained to do. Every child, every grown person was ordained to be involved in that movement. But I remember the most about President Kennedy is his death, and how seeing my grandmother and other people in the projects. I grew up in GWC home projects, and seeing other people, how they just mourn him like they had lost a son or a brother, and I was sad, very sad when he passed. But I didn't have that feeling that he was my family. But my grandmother had that feeling, and she cried. And I remember my father crying when President Kennedy was shot.
What do you remember from that day, November 22nd? How did you find out about the assassination?
We had a television. So I remember, I want to say it was Mr. Walter Cronkite that was talking about it, but it really was Dan Rather talking about his death, and it was big on the news and everything. It seemed like everybody in that projects, the grown people, took him as being family. So, it was just a sad, sad day. I remember we walked out of school at the all-Black high school, R.B. Hudson High. We left school that day and went to Brown Chapel Church, not Brown Chapel, Tabernacle Baptist Church, I'm sorry, and had a mass meeting. And I remember young people in their teens talking about what he meant to them. But I didn't have a voice on that because he was just a fine looking white man. I couldn't stand up there and say, oh, he was just a fine, handsome white man. I couldn't stand up there and say that. I didn't think it was as deep as what other young people was saying about him. And I remember somebody saying that our hope was gone. He was our hope, and our hope was gone.
So there was a sense that his death would be a setback to the civil rights movement?
Yes. From the young people that I remember being around, and at that time, Bernard Lafayette was there. And he spoke very eloquently about him, because I remember thinking, oh, so he was doing all of that. And it was like he was the hope of the of change. He was that hope, because they spoke so eloquently about him. And then to go home and have my grandmother sitting up there crying like she had lost a child, or a brother. Even Thanksgiving that year wasn't the same. It wasn't a, joyous getting ready for Christmas occasion as it had always been when we were young, younger. It was a sad occasion at that time. So.
After Kennedy's death, President Johnson championed the Civil Rights Bill, which was signed in July of '64. Do you remember noticing any concrete change after the passage of the civil rights legislation in '64?
Not in, if it was any, it wasn't happening in Selma, Alabama, or to me, the state of Alabama. The children of Birmingham in '63 had been jailed, beaten, had dogs, water hose put on them for that change. And that change did come in '64. But it didn't seem like it trickled down from Washington to Alabama. No, there was no outward change that you could see, because if there had been, we would not have been in jail nor beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in '65.
Right.
And I don't think that change actually happened until the late '60s, '68, '69, '70. And I'm talking about the Congressional Act of '64, cutting desegregation laws, or the Voting Rights Act of '65.
Were there different groups in Selma, like, of course, Dr. King's organization, SCLC, but there was also SNCC and CORE. Did they have a presence in Selma?
Oh, yes. SNCC was there in '63. Bernard Lafayette came in '63. And we were some disciplined children, because we were trained in the principles of nonviolence for almost a year, and then we started marching in '65. So, yes, they were all here, and they all took a part in training us in nonviolence. Mr. James, Reverend James Orange. Reverend Orange came from Dr. King's organization, SCLC. And our trainers, as we marched and went to jail, they went to jail with us. You know, we were not just defenseless little children or young people walking and marching. We were steady being trained, and they were steady walking and marching with us. So
you do such an excellent job of talking about March 7th in the book. I was wondering if maybe you could share for people watching this recording just a little bit about your memories of that horrific experience.
March 7th, 1965, also known as Bloody Sunday. I think I need to let you know why we were on that bridge that day. On February 26th, a young man named Jimmy Lee Jackson died in a Selma hospital, Good Samaritan. He was from Marion, Alabama, which is 30 miles from Selma, and a smaller rural town. And he had been shot during twice in the stomach during a night march in Marion, Alabama. The people were marching because Reverend James Orange had led a group of young people that day in a demonstration. They were all jailed. Reverend Orange, they let the children out, but they kept Reverend Orange in jail. Reverend Orange often told us that an Alabama state trooper came and threw a noose over his jail cell. And that's what he had to look at every day. I mean, all day. And he just knew he was gonna die. Well, somebody that was either in jail or worked at the jail heard the jailers and the Alabama state troopers and sheriff's people talking about letting Reverend Orange out of jail at some like 2 in the morning. And at that time, the Ku Klux Klan would pick him up and kill him. So the people was at a mass meeting when this was told to them, and the church was 2 blocks from the jail where he was being held. So they felt that if they marched the 2 blocks to the jail, surrounded the jail and stood there all night, they would prevent Reverend Orange from being taken and killed. During that march, this young man, Jimmy Lee Jackson, saw an Alabama state trooper attacking his 82-year-old grandfather and or mother. And he went to shield them and was shot. He died, as I said, on the 26th of February. We're doing the time between his death and March 7th. Some people had decided that they were going to, one, take Jimmy Lee's body, walk it from, Marion to Montgomery and put it on state capitol for George Wallace to see, because the man had been murdered. And we decided we wouldn't do that. So they said we will walk from Selma to Montgomery. And I said, okay, I can do that. And that's why we were on that bridge that day. We assembled at Brown Chapel AME Church here in Selma. We lined up on the playground next to the church, because church sits in the middle of a Black housing project. We were marching 2 abreast. Now, normally when we marched, we always marched, we were jubilant because of the music the music was a big part of us each day. And but this day it felt funny to me because we weren't jubilant. There was this air that I still can't explain around us. We were led by the late Congressman John Lewis, and the late Hosea Williams, Mr. Albert Turner, the late Mr. Albert Turner from Marion, Alabama, Mrs. Amelia Boynton, Mrs. Marie Foster, our student leader, Charles Malden, and I was in the 18th row from the front. When we got to the apex of the bridge and could see on the other side, all you saw was these Alabama state troopers in their blue uniform. Behind them was the Dallas County Sheriff, Jim Clark, and his deputies and his posse on horseback. There were also Alabama state troopers on horseback. When John and Hosea got to the line of state troopers, they were told that it would be no march between Selma and Montgomery today. We were told we had 2 to 3 minutes to disperse and go back to our church or homes. And normally when we was marching and we were stopped and they wasn't taking us to jail, we would kneel, pray, get up, turn around, and go back and regroup. Well, John and the front, we actually thought that we would be kneeling because one of our trainers, James Webb, was saying, kneel, kneel, because we thought we were gonna pray and turn around and go back. And I remember being down on my knees, and all of a sudden I heard these gunshots. And after the gunshots, there was this cloud of smoke coming up from the ground all around us. And I later found out it was tear gas, but the smoke got in your nostrils, your mouth, your eyes. You couldn't breathe, you couldn't see, causing much confusion. And I felt somebody grab me in the back of my collar from this kneeling position, and I was resisting. So this person put both hands on the front of my lapel and jerked me backwards from my knees. When he jerked me backwards, his hand came up by my mouth and I bit him. And I heard the word nigger twice. And he hit me in my forehead. He then pushed me away, and I got up and I started running towards this cloud of tear gas. And this man was running behind me, hitting me. I often tell people, and in my book, I tell people I must have passed out, because when I woke up, I was on a stretcher going into the back of a hearse. We didn't have ambulances for Black people during that time. But on November the 1st of last year, I was being interviewed by a team from CBS for a BET special called The Boiling Point. And he showed me some archival footage that they had found. And it shows me running into this cloud of tear gas and the sheriff's deputy running behind me, hitting me. I fell, and it shows a state trooper kicking me so hard I came up off the ground. The man next to him was a sheriff's deputy. He hit me with a stick. And the man next to him, another sheriff's deputy, kicked me and hit me. I have been thinking for 50 some years that I just passed out. But when I saw this film of what actually happened to me, I just started shaking and crying. And they had to end that interview. And to this day, I thank God that he did not let me remember any of this. But when I saw it on that film, all I could think about was what's happening today. I could see Derek Chauvin's face as he had his knee on Mr. George Floyd's neck. I could see that arrogant hatred from back then to today. And it tells me that my job has not been completed, that I can't sit back and just watch things happen, that I have to continue to raise my voice. After I woke up on the stretcher and they was putting me in the hearse, I told them I wasn't dead and I wasn't getting in there before my time. So I got up and I started running back across the bridge. When I got to the foot of the bridge on the Selma side, that's when I saw my baby sister, Joanne, in this man's arms. And she looked like she was dead. She just was limp, like a rag doll. And I stopped in my tracks. I couldn't move. All I could think about was I was supposed to be protecting her and I had gotten her killed. And what was I gonna tell grandmama and daddy? Somebody must have came and run by me and pushed me, where I was able to go to this man and ask him, was my sister dead? He had placed her in the back of a white car. And he said, no, she had just fainted. So I went to this car and I patting her in her face and calling her name. And she opened her eyes and she just started screaming. So I thought maybe somebody was about to hit me, do something. I just grabbed her hand and I started running. My thing was to get back to Brown Chapel Church. So we ran up in between the project buildings. And when we could see Brown Chapel, there was Selma police, Alabama state troopers, and sheriff's deputies surrounding the church. So my thought was to go to the other corner and go to First Baptist Church. I was so confused, we ran 10 steps past our back door, heading to First Baptist. When I got there, somebody said I was bleeding and I had needed to go to the hospital. I remember getting in this car. It was four men. One was a friend of mine named Lawrence Carter. He was a teenager and he came from a rural school, Keith High School, to March. When I got to the hospital, I remember speaking to the nurse, Ms. Vera Booker, and her asking me, was A.C. Blackmon, the cab driver, my father? And I said, yes. The next thing I remember is this white doctor coming towards me with this hook, something that looked like a hook. It was a needle. I don't remember anything after that until about 10:30 that night. And my father and I were walking up those 10 steps to our back door. My head was shaved. I had 7 stitches over my right eye and 28 in the back of my head. I became a very angry teenager that day. And I said, if there's ever a march from Selma to Montgomery, I'm going so I can show George Wallace what he did to me. But I also wanted him to know that he had created his worst nightmare. I was going to grow up and be an educated Black woman and come back and take his job. I'm glad dreams change.
One question that my daughter had was why only 300 marchers were allowed to make that trek from Selma to Montgomery.
Then to my knowledge and understanding, then President Lyndon Johnson federalized the Alabama National Guard to protect us from marching during that march. And they said, given the swampy area and the area we had to march through, Lowndes County, Alabama, they would only felt that they could only protect 300. See, when Dr. King came back after the March 7th brutality, Dr. King came back on and we marched on March the 9th, on Tuesday, March the 9th. It was thousands of people, thousands came to Selma because they had seen Bloody Sunday happening on television that Sunday night. And during that march, I was on the Turnaround Tuesday march with my sister Joanne. During that march, Dr. King, Reverend Athanathy, and all these clergy people were up front. When he got to the line of state troopers, and there was only the state troopers there this time. And we were told that there was be no march from Selma to Montgomery that day. And I remember Dr. Abernathy, Ralph Abernathy, doing a prayer. And the front where the whole march knelt down. But he did the prayer, and after he finished the prayer, Dr. King got up and turned around and headed. The crowd split like Red Sea. And we fell in behind as he would, him and the others would pass by us. We went to Brown Chapel Church, and he said he had filed for a federal injunction to give us permission to march from Selma to Montgomery with protection. And that was under a judge named Frank Johnson. And Judge Johnson signed those orders on March 17th, 1965. And on March the 18th, 1965, I was at Miss Amelia Boynton's house along with her, Miss Marie Foster, and Miss Mary Lamar, helping them to stuff envelopes for mailing. And I told them, you know, I was going to from Selma to Montgomery. I was going to march. And even though my daddy said I couldn't, I was going to do it. If I had to run away, I was going to march. And they brought me home that day. And they talked, all three of them talked to my father and my grandmother. And once they finished, I had permission to march from Selma to Montgomery. And on the 18th of March, 1965, my name became the youngest name for being on the list to march. The march started for really 3 days later on March 21st. And on March 22nd, I woke up, walked out of the tent. I just felt like I was a powerful little something because it was my 15th birthday. And I was doing something my grandmother had always taught us to do. And that was to be committed to whatever you say you were gonna do, or whatever you start, you had to be committed to it. And I just knew that was what I was gonna do. But then I looked up and I saw these 3 National Guardsmen. It was about 100 guardsmen there. But I focused on these 3 that was standing by a Jeep. They had their rifles in their hand. They had on rain gear because it was misty raining. And they had the knives affixed to the end of their rifles and looked like they were looking directly at me with this hatred. And I realized that as I looked around, there was nobody that looked like me protecting me. And these 3 men looked like they were there to complete the job they had started 2 weeks ago on Bloody Sunday. I thought they was gonna kill me. So I ran back in the tent yelling and screaming, "Don't let them kill me, don't let them kill me, I wanna go home." The march started an hour late that day, all because of me and some awesome women that thought if they sent me back home as terrified as I was, it would not do me any good. So they were going to send me back home, but they was telling me things about why we were marching, I guess. But I remember this one guy, Jim Letherer. Jim was a white guy who had lost a leg in a war. And he was walking from Selma to Montgomery on those 2 crutches. And Jim said before he let anyone else harm another hair on my head, he would lay down and die for me. And I was thinking, oh, let me see that then. But no, I knew that he could not do that for me. And my grandmother said, whatever you start, you have to be determined and committed to take it to the end, no matter what the outcome. And she used to tell us she wasn't raising any quitters. And I could hear my grandmother's voice in my head as plain as daylight was, telling me these things. And I knew that I had started something. I had started to walk from Selma to Montgomery. And if I did not complete that walk, I would not be a strong, effective person at anything else I ever tried. So that day, I picked up I picked up my fear, and I tell people, grandmama used to tell us, it's all right to be afraid. That shows that you are human. But you have to embrace that fear, because if you let it own you, you will be fearful all your life, and you won't try anything different. And I took that fear that day, and I put it close to my heart, and then I embraced it, and I told her, you can't rule me, I own you. And that's what, along with Jim, made me finish that march. And I remember when we got to Montgomery, we had to wait that day for about 2 hours over by the Montgomery Airport, Danley Field. We were waiting for Dr. King to come in, and he led us to the city of St. Jude, where we camped at overnight. And I remember when we got to the city of St. Jude, I just started crying. I fell down on the ground and I started crying, and nobody could console me. And I remember Ms. Mary Lamar telling people, just leave her alone. She'll be all right, just let her cry. She ain't crying blood, just leave her alone. And I cried until I had no more tears to cry, I guess. But I felt that I was crying out that fear, that hatred, that I had bottled up inside of me.
When President Obama and Congressman Lewis came for the 50th anniversary in 2015, did you participate in that?
Oh, yes, I have a picture. I have a picture with 15 other foot soldiers in the tent. We were the first people that President and Obama and Michelle Obama greeted when they hit Selma, Alabama. When they came across that bridge in those presidential limos with those flags flying, we were in a tent waiting on them. And they came in and hugging and shaking hands and thanking everybody. I even got to show both of them. I showed it to her first, my scar over my right eye and the knot in the back of my head. And she called him, she said, honey, come here. You must see this. And he came and he felt my knot in the back of my head and saw my scar and hugged me and thanked me for being there in 1965. And then the White House photographer said, Mr. President, we really need to take this picture so we can move forward. And he said in this authoritative voice, all right, everybody line up. So when they lined up, Congressman Lewis is in front of me. There's me, Michelle behind me, Barack behind her, and all them other foot soldiers.
Oh, wow.
Oh, so I have that picture displayed prominently with my family pictures. And it made me thought about my grandmother displaying the plate with President Kennedy, and then Dr. King, and then Attorney General Robert Kennedy, you know. And I said, oh, I'm getting to be like my mom. But yes, It was an awesome day. And besides that, they would have a blog every Sunday talking about their week past and the upcoming week. And so that next day, on the presidential blog, Michelle said, they were talking about their trip here to Selma. And Michelle said she met this woman who was beaten on the bridge at age 14 and saw my scars. And her daughter was 14 and she didn't think she would let her daughter, she don't know if she would let her daughter, be in something like that. And then a couple of days later, she was on the Ellen DeGeneres show, and she told the same story about meeting this woman who was on that bridge at age 14. And I remember getting on Facebook each time saying, she's talking about me, y'all. She made, even though the book, Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom, had come out, and I was going all around the country with book signings and stuff. My publishers, Penguin Random House Publishing, was, had it going on with the book tour. So that wasn't as exciting as meeting, because I had met President Obama when he was down here as Senator Obama. That wasn't exciting as meeting him and hearing them talk about me on the blog and on television.
Oh, wow. Tell me how the book came to be. How did that project get started?
A long time ago, my sister was the director of the National Voting Rights Museum and Institute. She received a call from Elspeth Leacock. Elspeth and Susan write children books. And they were writing a series of 4 books, and one was called Journeys for Freedom. And they would, their stories was of children who took part in pivotal events in this country, from Hiawatha through the farmers movement in California. So they were looking for a young person who took part in the demonstrations, maybe in the march. And Elspeth said, my sister Joanne told her, oh, you want to talk to my sister Lynda, and gave her my address and my phone number. She called me, and this was when I had first started talking about all these things. She called me, and I gave her, a little bit of the story. And then about an hour later, her and Susan was on the phone, and they said they wanted to put my story in their book. And it's in their book under Walk Together Children. The title of the book is Journeys for Freedom. And I talked with them, recorded my story with them. And then about 1.5 years later, the book, was finished. And I had never seen them, just spoke with them by phone. I was thumbing through the television one day and passed the book review channel, and I heard my name, and I went back to it. And there's Elspeth and Susan with the book and telling my story. And reading it, Elspeth started reading it, and then she starts to cry, and Susan picks it up and finished. And so for a couple of years, I would go around speaking with them on the topic of history to children. History, it can't happen without you. And one day Elspeth said, Lynda, we need to do a book just about you. And I said, I wouldn't buy no book just about me. I got nothing to say. And it took them a good 5 years to get that out of me. What is printed out of me, although it would have been a whole lot more, but we decided to take it in a different direction because we first decided to, we got an agent. This was in the first year President Obama was elected. We got an agent, but nothing happened. So we put the book back on the shelf. And in 2012, we got another agent, Charlotte Sheedy. And in 2013, Penguin Publishers, Dial Division, was looking at the book, and the editor, Lori Hornick, Lori said, this is a classic. I'm gonna bring it out in January. She said on January the 8th, 2015, for the 50th anniversary. And this was like April of 2013. And I was saying, Lord, I should live so long, to see it. But it came out just as she said, on the day she said. And the next day, the movie Selma came out. So people automatically put those two things together. And I let my book ride the movie Selma's coattail, and I let the movie Selma ride my book's coattail. Although I was very disappointed in the movie because it did not show what children did. It didn't show any children in the movie. And when I looked at it a second time, I saw that the movie was not about Selma. It was about Dr. King. So,
In traveling and doing the appearances and signings, I imagine you've encountered a lot of young people. I'm wondering if there are any particular interactions or questions that young people have asked you that stand out in your mind.
I was in Wausau, Wisconsin, for 6 days. I spoke to 3,500 plus children in the Central Wisconsin School District. And I was at an intermediate school in somewhere in Wisconsin. And I told my story, and I always do a Q&A. So one of the children asked me, did I play with Harriet? And I realized they was talking about Harriet Tubman. And I told them, no, I wasn't quite that old. And then somebody else asked, did I play with Rosa? And no. And they wanted to know what type of food I had in jail. Well, we really didn't have any good food. So we would take our own sandwiches, bologna and cheese sandwich, peanut butter, and sandwiches, cookies, candy to jail when we went. And we shared it with everybody else. But while I was telling my story, in my peripheral vision to my right, I saw this young man. He just, and he was just fidgeting during the whole story. And I turned and I asked him, I said, do you have a question? Me? Yeah, you. no, I don't have a question. I said, oh, yes, you do. I see it all over your face. He crossed his arms and he said, how do you feel about white supremacy groups? And I said, how do you think they feel about me? And he said, oh, they don't like you. And I'd laugh and I say, that's all right, I don't like them either. And everybody in that auditorium collectively exhaled. So when we were leaving, a teacher came and apologized. She said, before you go, I just want to apologize for Joshua's inappropriate question. And I told her, you don't have to apologize. I say, that baby just honored me. He heard something I said that contradicted something he has heard, read, or whatever. And he questioned it. I say, that is an honor to me. She said, oh, well, he shouldn't have. I say, wait a minute. What you need to remember is you're his teacher. You're here to teach him academics. That child learned life lessons from home. So you don't have to apologize for him. That was like, that was just an honor to me. And there are other stories from all age groups in Brooklyn, New York. There's a elementary and intermediate school, and I got to speak to the entire school population. And there was a third grader who told the local television station and newspapers that she was just like me. She had seen her mother die when she was 5. She was from Iran or Iraq, and she knew from reading my book and from meeting me that she was going to grow up and be a change in this world. And that was mighty powerful. Plus, I have a group of high school children in Clearwater, Florida, from Clearwater High School that are my ambassadors. I met them in 2015 and went down to speak to their school, but I met them here in Selma on a civil rights tour. And last year, on the 28th of January 2020, my ambassadors from Clearwater High School had organized 850 plus children in a unity walk march across a bridge in Clearwater, Florida. This was children from 16 different high schools in that school system. They organized this themselves. They went about talking to 16 principals, 16 schools. They did everybody, school board, superintendent, and it was just an awesome thing. So I have so many stories, but my favorite is in Denver, Colorado, where I had kindergartners through intermediate school, but the kindergartners were sitting around me on the floor and no one fidgeted. All of those little children in the picture shows them looking up at me like they understood every word I said.
Wow. it's gratifying for someone like me who devotes his life to history to recognize when powerful recollections have the ability to impact people's lives today and sort of cross those generational barriers and really affect people. So that's extraordinary. And I saw it firsthand with my own child. You know, she fidgets, she has ADHD, and the fact that she sat there and we read that book in one sitting, and she recognized that I was going to be talking with you the following week. And what an amazing thing that was, that you were real. You were a real person who experienced this. Oh my goodness. It was a powerful moment for me as a parent, but also as a historian. You've lived in Selma your entire life?
No, I lived for 14 years on Staten Island, New York. I tell people, by the grace of God, I raised 2 girls in New York. No pregnancies, no drugs, and no welfare. Got them through high school and into college. And I moved back home to marry the first guy I had a crush on at 12 years old, and told my cousin, I'm going to marry him. And I didn't even see his face. He was walking down the hallway in front of us with his football uniform on. And I did not even see his face. And my cousin told me she was going to tell my grandmother. I said, I don't care. I'm going to marry him one day. And I said, Lord, I want to marry him. And we had 32 years of happiness. He passed in 2019.
Well, ma'am, you are a national treasure, and I could talk with you all day. You've been very generous with your time. Is there anything that we haven't talked about? Any other stories or memories you'd like to share?
Nah.
Well, I hope if you ever have the chance to come to Dallas that you'll visit the site here where President Kennedy was assassinated. It would be a great honor to meet you in person and maybe show you our museum.
All right. And I hope I can do that one day. I thank you for having me. And I thank you for letting me tell my story. I say God give everybody talents. So he gave me the gift of gab. And now I see that my story and the story of other young people during that time will play, hopefully, a pivotal part in changing history one more time.